The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Next Generation episode, Who Watches the Watchers? I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Star Trek t-shirt or phone case or coffee mug or all kinds of different things by visiting sqpn.com/merch, M-E-R-C-H. We have a great design that features the three of us and the Starship Enterprise, and every time I wear it, my kids laugh because it shows me hanging off the nacelle of the Enterprise, and it's great. So go check it out. Even if, go to the link just to see the image, because Micah Murphy, who did all the designs for our t-shirts, just did such a great job. So check it out. All right. This episode, as I mentioned, is called Who Watches the Watchers? And so, Jimmy, could you give us a recap?
This week, Picard and the gang arrive at a planet where some anthropologists are secretly watching some proto-Vulcans who are in the Bronze Age. But there's an emergency, and the holographic projector they're using to hide themselves fails, revealing their location. This leads to one of the locals discovering them, only to fall and be severely injured. Dr. Crusher beams him up to save his life, but when she tries to wipe his memory, it doesn't work, and the local saw enough while aboard the Enterprise that he comes to believe that Picard is super powerful and a god. This idea infects the locals, and they start forming a religion. This comes to the attention of the crew because Riker and Troy are in disguise and have come down to find a missing anthropologist. They try to convince the locals that the local guy's experience was just a dream and he shouldn't worship Picard as a god, but then the locals find the missing anthropologist, which confirms that it wasn't just a dream. Troy distracts the locals so Riker can secretly get the anthropologist alone for an emergency beam-up, but the plan goes wrong and Troy is captured. The locals are afraid that by letting the anthropologist go, they may have angered the Picard, so they debate whether to punish Troy in order to avert Picard's wrath. Unwilling to have a religion founded in his name, Picard beams up the alien leader to convince her that he's not a god. He tells her about technology and lets her watch one of the anthropologists conveniently die in sickbay to show her that he doesn't have the power of life and death. He then accompanies the leader lady back to the planet, where they try to convince the locals that he's not a god. And this is harder than you might think, but to prove it, Picard lets himself be shot with a bow and arrow, and that finally convinces the proto-Vulcans. Afterwards, they shut down their hidden anthropology station and leave the planet. The end.
So the title of this episode is taken from the Latin phrase quis custodiet ipsos custodes, which was first used by the...
Nice try.
Thank you. I know it's... if anyone would like to say it in a way that is appropriate, I would appreciate it.
Quis custodiet ipsos custodes.
Okay, thank you. And the Roman poet Juvenal,
Mm-hmm.
a 1st or 2nd century Roman satirist. So who watches the watchers?
Yeah. Or who guards the guards, or words to that effect.
Right. And or who custodians the custodians. So the idea of a duck blind as the Starfleet observes a primitive species will come up again in Star Trek.
In the movies.
Insurrection, yes. Kind of an interesting that they went back to that. It's a common trope in sci-fi, the advanced species that gets worshipped as gods. I mean, this is kind of the Arthur Clarke maxim of any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic and that sort of thing. So
it's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Star Wars does it. Stargate had an early episode that did almost exactly this. Not quite the same thing. That was more intentional, where the SG team, the leader became And in fact,
even more, Stargate is all about advanced technology people pretending to be gods.
Yeah.
well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I was thinking more of the SG folks pretending, but yeah, the whole thing is
you got the Gwald and the ancients and everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean and you can kind of go back to Apocalypse Now, where in that there was a U.S. Army colonel pretending to be a god for a primitive tribe. So it's a fairly common trope, a common story, and so they're doing it again here.
More important than that, Vasquez rocks are back.
That's my very next note. Yes. We talked recently about, and I'm forgetting the order in which we're doing things, but I think just before we did the season of Lower Decks, we did Arena, the original series, which all took place outside at Vasquez Rocks, and we are back at the Arena for Mintaka 3.
Well, it was funny because I missed that discussion on Arena, so I went back and watched it before I watched this episode. I was like, wait a minute, I just saw that place.
I think it might have been literally the same place where Kirk gets thrown a boulder at him by the Gorn we see in this episode. So yeah, it's really familiar.
Yeah, according to Memory Alpha, the cast and crew spent 2 days shooting in 100-degree weather at Vasquez Rocks, and due to the presence of local snakes, scorpions, and bees, no attractant such as deodorant or perfume could be used by the actors.
Ooh.
And one of the things I remember from when I visited Vasquez Rocks a number of years ago was the signs warning you about rattlesnakes. So, yeah.
It's amazing that that must be some really good location because they're always filming there despite that.
Yeah, well, it's not far. It's in the LA metro area, and it's situated in such a way that you can shoot at it without it looking like you're in the LA metro area.
And it looks kind of otherworldly. It doesn't look like a typical mountain chain or something like that.
I mean, it's kind of funny, like the idea that we get so used to the sets, like the locations used in so many TV shows, that our mindset of what an alien planet should look like is formed by these places near LA or Vancouver or New York City in that sense. And it's kind of funny that happens.
What you mean, all the planets around the Stargates aren't exactly like British Columbia forest?
Yes, all the planets in the Stargate universe are pine trees. And X-Files too.
And that is one advantage now that they're doing the new filming
Digital
where they basically
set.
have a giant LCD screen behind them on the set where they can do more creative things with how the worlds look.
Yes, it can be anywhere and look like anything. And I think that's to our benefit. Yeah.
They can also do color replacement in a way they couldn't back when SG-1 was originally being filmed. So now you could take the British Columbia and be out in the forest and make all the trees blue or something.
Without making the team look orange.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We have this anthropological team, observing these primitives here, the primitive tribe. And it just the whole thing seems irresponsible and unethical because if you're discovered at all, you've contaminated them. Like, I don't think we would tolerate this today, right? I mean, if there are tribes in the Amazon, there's a tribe that's on an island off of India that they're isolated from the modern world.
Sentinelese. Yeah, the Sentinel. Do not go to Sentinel Island. They will kill you.
Yes, that happened recently. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is also contrary to modern anthropological practice where you make contact and you go in and you embed in the culture that you're studying and get them to teach you your ways. So this is not how anthropologists do it in the real world, but in the real world, we don't have a Prime Directive.
Right.
Well, they did this. They did this at times, and it obviously things like this happened in real world too,
in the
where
past.
they would go past, where they would go and do duck blinds and stuff like that, and they'd get caught.
Right. And it just seems like they've regressed in their time, or they've gotten arrogant in that our technology will sufficiently hide us.
My first note on the episode is another stupid Prime Directive episode.
Yeah.
It's another Prime Directive episode. My second note is stupid anti-religion parable.
Yeah.
Yes. And there is quite a number of anti-religion statements that go through this. Yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't need to be there. This is just Gene Roddenberry wanting to take pokes at religion, or it at least flows from his approach. But the idea of Picard not wanting to be worshipped as a god and not wanting a religion founded in his name and all that would entail, all that's perfectly reasonable. It's really just, I don't know, like less than 5 lines in this that you could just delete, and it would be perfectly understandable, perfectly reasonable. It wouldn't be anti-religion.
Right.
But they've got to get their digs in there.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I'll bring those up as we go because they're kind of they kind of stand out a bit. We start with the problem starts with the reactor powering the duck blind station goes bad.
Yeah. So they're on their way to the planet, which is called Mintaka 3, and Geordi comes to the bridge and says he's got the parts ready, but he doesn't know why they need this much power for their reactor. And this is bad writing because what it does is it makes Geordi look incompetent.
Yes.
Right.
You know, he because then they get it's because they need a holographic generator for their duck blind. And it's like, anthropology, okay, all we're doing is feeding the audience information at the expense of making Geordi look stupid.
Why not put that in the captain's log, which is the whole point of doing a captain's log at the top of the episode?
Yeah, exactly. So, you could say it's to get Geordi a line so that LeVar Burton can get paid for the episode.
But they could have done a line like, "We've got the part that they need to fix their holographic generator,
right,
for the duck blind."
Yeah,
I mean something as simple as that.
Also, the proto-Vulcans they're portrayed as very reasonable and peaceful. And this is because apparently the writers of Next Gen had forgotten their Vulcan history.
Yes.
Because Vulcans did not become peaceful until the time of Surak. Vulcans in the Bronze Age should be incredibly violent.
Yes.
And these people are not. Yeah.
I mean, are they trying to posit the idea of parallel evolution idea,
Well, they don't address that, but but in the original series, in the episode Return to Tomorrow, they went to a planet called Arita or something like that, and the Aritans were an ancient race. This is the one where they have the Sargon in the mind globe thing, and Henoch in the mind globe, and they do some body swapping. But according to Mr. Spock in that episode, the Aritans' previous colonization of the galaxy could explain some aspects of Vulcan prehistory. So these people could also be offshoots of the Aritans and have some Vulcanoid heritage. Also, later in Next Gen, we'll have the chase, where it turns out that there was a race of progenitors that seeded the galaxy with the raw materials for intelligent life that produced all of the races we're familiar with. But that wouldn't explain specifically the Vulcans.
Yeah.
I did feel like they tried to make it like this was a later parallel evolution of a Vulcan-like species, but it really kind of fell flat. They just kind of threw a line out there saying something like they're very much on a parallel track to the Vulcans, and that's kind of about all they said.
It feels like what we needed is a rational species, a culture that we will immediately recognize as being rational and non-superstitious, and that's Vulcans because they're logical, and that will make it all the more troubling that they would fall back into dark superstition of religion, and I think that was the shortcut that they took, and not all that great, I think.
And they even made the makeup to look kind of Romulan-like, which of course we know the Romulans are offshoots from the Vulcans. So they look very similar to how TNG had dealt with Romulans. Really
dislike the TNG Romulan makeup. It just why change it? Why that awful heavy brow thing was just weird. And I just would rather if they just stuck with Romulans and Vulcans look alike and just go with it. Stop doing that. But they messed with the Klingons too, so whatever.
Well, the Klingons were an upgrade.
Yeah, right.
The first time.
Yes, that's true.
And that predates TNG, so.
So the reactor has failed,
Yes.
and they've got enough battery power for a few hours, and the Enterprise is going to get there in 20 minutes, and then their batteries blow up.
Mm.
And that's what causes the crisis. The Enterprise has to get there super fast, so they do. And then they beam down to help the people in the room where the batteries blew up in the duct blind. And even though the reactor is not functioning and the batteries have exploded, everything is electrified.
Yes.
And you can't touch stuff without it shocking you, which is a major plot point because it shocks the local guy, which is what causes him to fall. So how does this work? You've got an electrified metal frame for this duct blind, even though you have no reactor and no batteries?
Yeah, like the supercharged.
Apparently, well, first of all, apparently they forgot about things like grounding straps. You know, that you can put into a building that will ground it if something like this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, you know, maybe I guess they must have had another bank of batteries that didn't blow up. Who knows?
I like that the one guy who like the anthropologist who ends up they having to rescue later is like his solution is dive out the window.
Yeah.
Which is probably not a bad solution, I suppose, when everything's electrified and shooting stuff around. And then he apparently wanders off grievously injured. And that's when our crew beams down with no protection whatsoever.
I know.
Yeah.
Put on a suit. And they start fixing things. And then Liko and Oji, this father and daughter of these Mintakans, they show up outside. They see they're doing something with a sundial reading.
Yeah, the daughter OG has been appointed the official record keeper for their village, and so she's got to look at a sundial, apparently like at morning and at noon and maybe at dusk or something for record keeping purposes. They're doing an astronomy project calendar thing.
Yeah.
Which is not unreasonable. You do have calendars in human history that are based on astronomical observations. Like, for example, the Jewish calendar was a lunar solar calendar where every month began with the new moon. And if you read the Talmud, it's actually fascinating. They have all these rules because at least in the way it worked was at the temple in Jerusalem, you would have people who would cite the new moon, and then they would tell the priests, and then the priests would announce that the new month began. And then they would spread the word to other local Jewish communities, in Judea. And they have all these rules for how to test the new moon witnesses. Obviously they need to be of good eyesight and so forth, but you have these questions you're supposed to ask them, like, okay, if you like, which way was the crescent of the new moon pointing? And if he gets it wrong, he has said nothing. And you've got to have it confirmed by like 2 or 3 people, and they have to meet these qualifications. And so having someone actually, being like an official timekeeper who does observations that's reasonable.
Yep.
What if it was cloudy? I suppose wait.
This is a big problem with this kind of system, actually. And in fact, there have been studies done that the ancient moon sighting stuff doesn't really work that great because of cloudiness or human eyesight misidentifying things in the sky as the moon, which are not the moon, but you kind of look like it when you're trying to discern something really faint.
Yeah.
Right.
Like just a little wisp of cloud or something. And archaeoastronomers have gone back and looked at records and done calculations, and it's like a third of the time you're going to be wrong about the exact appearance of the new moon.
Right, sure. Right. Because they didn't have telescopes. That's Galileo.
Now, Liko and Oji are both actors that have gone on to do other things that people are more familiar with them.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Liko was played by Ray Weiss, who was a VP in a season of, Vice President in a season of 24. That's probably what he's best known for. He's been on a lot of things.
Oh, he's known for something else. He's Leland Palmer from Twin Peaks.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And so it was. Watched all of Twin Peaks, and I was immediately, wait, that's Ray Wise.
Yeah.
And the human MacGuffin in this episode, the anthropologist they've got to find who goes missing, his name is Palmer.
Oh, that's funny.
I was going, wait, Leland Palmer, and is this a Twin Peaks reference? And apparently not, because this episode came out in 1989, and Twin Peaks didn't come out until 1990.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That's just a cool coincidence.
Yeah, but knowing what happens with Leland Palmer in Twin Peaks, it's like, oh, wow, this is creepy.
And
I
the other
won't
one?
spoil it for people who haven't seen Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
And then OG, what she's most known for, this Pamela Segal is the name of the actress. She was the voice of Bobby Hill on King of the Hill. And there was a couple of points where I could hear it. I could recognize her voice. Whereas it's like, yeah, that is definitely Bobby Hill's voice.
It's so funny. So many of those animated shows, the young boys they're voiced by female actresses.
Bart Simpson's another one.
Bart Simpson's like that.
Yeah. Oh, that is funny.
So both of them are actors that have gone on to bigger things from this episode.
She's apparently done other live action stuff too, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. So after the holographic duck blind comes down, they can see the station up there, the anthropology station. And Liko climbs up to investigate it, and he touches the mysteriously electrified metal frame of the window and gets shocked and falls and injured, which causes Dr. Crusher to spring into action and save him by beaming him up to the Enterprise.
In full sight of his daughter.
in full sight of his daughter. And Picard on the Enterprise is just totally uptight about this.
Yep.
He is so cold, it's like, why didn't you let him die?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so this
Dr. Crusher is because we were responsible for his injuries.
Right.
Yep.
And I was like, so who's right here? Like, so Picard has the Prime Directive on his side. So legally, he's empowered to, they as Starfleet are empowered to let this guy die in order to save the to keep the Prime Directive. But ethically, morally,
ethically, morally, you saved the guy's life.
Right.
Yep.
I was going to say, this is the problem with the Prime Directive.
And as the lead doctor later points out, as soon as that duck blind went down, the Prime Directive has already been violated.
Yeah.
The damage is done.
Right. There's nothing.
It's just a matter of containment at this point, and saving this guy's life and trying to wipe his memory is the obvious thing to do.
Because one of my problems with this is, so if the Prime Directive says it's okay for let this guy die, to contain the contamination, what about killing anyone who's seen the stuff? Like, would that also be allowed? I mean, it's when you start, pulling down the moral framework here, anything becomes allowable to safeguard the Prime Directive, because the Prime Directive is the most important thing ever. No. Because in the end here, we actually show that the Prime Directive is not really, all the most important thing ever, because we can expose these people to advanced technology and fix it at the same time and not have it be a terrible loss.
What I like about this episode is after the contamination has occurred and after Liko gets back to the planet, having seen Picard and the way everyone on the Enterprise sucks up to him, he concludes he's a god, and is how logical the Mintakans are as they work through and debate this idea of religion. And it's like they're actually being very logical in how they do that. And I like that.
Yeah, that was good. This is a problem with all of Star Trek, which is, for some reason, Liko can understand everything everyone is saying on the Enterprise when he's on there, in his half-conscious state.
Even though he has no universal translator. So, it's a Time Lord gift.
Yeah, exactly. A gift of the Enterprise.
The Enterprise bestows on anyone who comes aboard.
The Enterprise's telepathic circuits.
Yeah.
Actually, there could be, if you're Dr. Crusher and you're treating him, you could give him a temporary universal translator for treatment purposes in case you need to ask diagnostic questions and so forth, or tell him, reassure him, this will not hurt you. I'm trying to help you, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you could infer that he just realized everyone was sucking up to Picard based on their body language.
Although he references specific things Picard says that other people say, like about reviving someone from death and that sort of stuff, or what he interprets as reviving from death. But in any case, this seeing the Enterprise revives this religious belief, the myths that they knew, the stories that they knew of the overseer which was their god, and it kind of revives us. And so then they have to send Troy and Riker down to go retrieve the missing anthropologist. And just like in Strange New Worlds premiere episode, we temporarily alter their appearance, although this time it's probably plastic and not, genetic changes in that one.
Also, they have subcutaneous communicators, which is an idea from the novels.
Yes.
And that's where it first appears, and it makes a lot of sense. So at least, you're in constant audio communication. They can hear up on the Enterprise everything that's happening around you.
Right. Another problem, by the way, universal translator problem is so they've got universal translators, but how do they match their lips up to the,
We don't talk about these things.
Yeah.
I know. I watch it and I go, but I know I'm obsessive.
Screen. Holographic screen across their mouth so it looks right.
That's what it is. Okay. So one thing I want to point out that Memory Alpha points out is that every time Riker goes undercover, it goes bad. First contact, frame of mind, and preemptive strike. All things like he goes undercover and everything goes to heck, and he's they have to pull him out of the fire. So just no sending Riker on these undercover operations anymore.
I will say Troy obviously had fun with it, at least at first, when, talking about, the woman goes first and all that,
Yes.
She actually got to show some personality, which was kind of nice.
That is, as the seasons went on, she got a little bit more personality than they started with. I do have to call out their lame attempt to gaslight them in Talkins about the
it was just a dream.
It was just a dream, of course. It's
a shared dream between the father and daughter, nonetheless.
Yeah.
Which is not impossible with Vulcans since they're telepathic.
True.
I mean, that could be a fringe phenomenon that could happen among Vulcans.
Yes. But there are these strangers who show up and start, blabbing about, oh, no, that couldn't possibly be true. And like, who are you again? Would be the natural reaction, but okay.
We're cloth traders, we told you.
Right.
But then we're not carrying any cloth.
Yeah, we get these small bundles. There are samples. So then we have Riker's botched rescue of Palmer, which he eventually gets him away. Although he's discovered as as he's running away with Palmer, and
he's got him in a fireman carry hold.
Yeah, and he keeps running around the corner. This guy's chasing him with the bow and arrow, and he with this really cool modern compound bow. And Riker keeps going around the corner, and where he should say "beam us up," but he doesn't until they find this little hidey hole that they sneak into and beam up. But it was kind of an annoying chase.
The whole point is they're trying not to beam up in front of them.
Right, but he keeps going out of sight where he could beam out, but I mean, maybe he doesn't realize so far close behind the guy.
Well, this is though where they always had to stop and then be beamed up. You never see them running and get beamed up mid-run. Yeah,
that's sort of a new Trek thing. The newer shows. So we have Liko. I keep calling him Loki. Liko keeps making these ridiculous leaps of logic. Like we need to appease the Picard by harming Troy. He decides these things about what the Picard is going to want based on nothing really except his own fears.
Well, so I have in my notes that the dialogue is flat a lot in this episode. This is a third season Trek episode, and so it's the writers haven't fully hit their stride yet. Mm-hmm. But it's reasonable that he would have that as a question because he knows Picard wanted Palmer found, and they found Palmer, and they were keeping him for the Picard. And then these people have help Palmer escape. Well, the Picard wanted him found. Is that going to cause a problem? That's a reasonable question. Now, Liko is written in this weird, almost Twin Peaks way, on the dialogue level, but it's a reasonable question to ask. And then you have the other characters, providing other native perspectives, raising other reasonable interpretations.
Right.
I was going to say, he alternates between very logical and reasonable to crazy Looney Tunes fanatic back to logical and reasonable. And it's just
yeah, it goes back and forth, and then we have the Dr. Barron, he's the head anthropologist, and he's
way more reasonable than Picard is.
Well, as an anthropologist, he actually probably knows a little bit about the Prime Directive and this sort of thing. And he points out, yes, the damage is done. They've already started a religion, and he tells Picard, give them a creed, give them a framework of belief, so that this religion does not immediately become destructive and violent or whatever. Give them a creed that they can follow that is good for them then. And Picard totally rejects that idea.
Yeah, so he beams up Nuria, who's the leader of the community, and she immediately, when he says, "Hi, I'm Jean-Luc Picard," she immediately prostrates herself.
Yes.
And he's like, no, get up. And she's like, "Why? Does it not please you?" And he's like, "I do not deserve it." Mm-hmm. Which is a great line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also is, for me, this was reminiscent of what happens in the book of Acts when Paul and Barnabas, is it Lycaonia they're in? They heal a paralyzed person, and everyone concludes that Paul and Barnabas are Zeus and Hermes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they conclude that Barnabas is Zeus, which I guess tells us something about what Barnabas must have looked like.
Yeah.
And that Paul is Hermes because he's the one who talks so much. You know, Hermes was the messenger of the gods.
Right.
And a priest of Zeus is there and brings out a bull and is going to sacrifice it to them.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Dudes, we are just men, okay?" And so this was kind of Picard's equivalent moment of that.
We could still have a barbecue if you're really into that.
Yeah.
So Picard actually has a line in here around this point where I think it's to Dr. Barron. He says, abandoning belief in the supernatural was an achievement for the Mintakans, and that to believe in God is to go back to the dark ages of ignorance, superstition, and fear. And this is one of those lines you're talking about, Jimmy. That's like, wow, that is so anti-religion, anti what Trek will eventually embrace with Bajor, but.
Yeah, it's also like, guys, I thought you were tolerant of other people's cultures.
Yeah, right.
And that's definitely a thanks, Gene Roddenberry. We appreciate that.
Yeah, it feels heavy-handed and out of character, and certainly, there are plenty of religions that are not, including Christianity, that are not dark ages of ignorance. It's such a mischaracterization of actual history to begin with.
Well, it's the idea of calling it the Dark Ages in the first place instead of the Middle Ages or something like that.
Right.
Medieval ages, because it was dark because of religion. It was dark because of religion, keeping the information from the people and stuff like that. And it's like, no, it was a very difficult time, and religion did everything it could to keep things, knowledge during it.
Well, and in fact, there was a lot of, today we'd call it science. At the time, it was called natural philosophy. Mm-hmm. But there's actually a book called The Light Ages, which talks about the monastic scientists who were around in the Middle Ages and all of their scientific contributions. So it's well worth reading.
And if you want to see a great science fiction book that kind of shows what the church was like back then, Canticle for Leibowitz, where it shows, this monastery out in the New Mexico desert or Arizona desert, collecting everything they can after a nuclear apocalypse to recover science, recover knowledge, to do this natural philosophy. And it really shows that was what the church was doing at that time.
Yeah, classic sci-fi novel.
Great one.
So Picard wants to convince Nuria that he's not a god, and that's, like we mentioned, he brings her up to the ship. This is another thing that Picard has a tendency of doing, by the way. He bringing local women up to orbit.
Let me show you the view from my apartment.
Exactly.
So in the episode Justice, Rivan, then later Marasta Yale in First Contact, and then of course Lily in the episode First Contact, and then Lily in Star Trek First Contact, the movie. So it's a thing. Riker going undercover, going badly, and Picard bringing women to show them their world from orbit. So
he's got a speech here where he talks to her. He's trying to explain that we're just more advanced technologically than you are. And he uses this analogy. He says, "Did your people always live in huts?" And she's like, "No, we found tools in caves." So the logical inference is that our ancestors used to live in caves. Like, okay, so why do you live in huts now? Well, huts are better. So why didn't your ancestors live in huts? Well, they must not have known how to make them, but now you do. And he's like, "Welcome to my bachelor pad super space hut."
Yeah.
And so he's got this analogy that he's working to try to communicate. We're just like you, but we're more technologically advanced. And that's actually it's pretty nicely done. You know, the dialogue is nicely written. He's relating to her in a way that she could understand. She's responding. Nuria's acting is a little flat. But, you know, she's been told to act like a scared Vulcan, so whatever. But then he kind of over convinces her, and she doesn't realize, okay, you are like us, but you're way advanced. So please bring the 6 flood victims from last winter back to life.
Right.
And it's like, oh, no way to do that. So let's go to sickbay where someone is conveniently dying right now, and I'll show you how we can't bring them back.
Yeah, it's that he finally he thinks he's convinced her, then realizes, no, I really haven't like changed your mind. You still think I'm a magical being, and then showing her that the sign. It felt kind of ghoulish, actually, using that death as a way to convince someone else of something. It is, I don't know, like a private moment for someone dying.
Yeah, it's also it's just so convenient.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that too. There's no Vulcans on board.
It would be better if he had told her a story.
Yeah,
and said, you know, my mom died, and I would do anything to bring her back, but I can't.
Right.
And the same is true of your flood victims. If someone has just now died, or we could maybe restart their heart, we could maybe save that person, but after a certain period of time, we have no way of helping them. And so even if we had the bodies of your 6 flood victims, there's nothing we could do for them this much later.
Right.
So
back on the planet, there's a thunderstorm coming in, and Liko is interpreting that as the Picard's wrath.
In Liko's favor, this is an unseasonal thunderstorm. It's not normally the season for thunderstorms. So that could make it more reasonable to think it's a sign it is literally a sign from above.
Yeah. And so he's coming up with, things we need to do, to harm Troy in order to appease the Picard. And Troy, she has a line here, that's the problem with believing in a supernatural being trying to determine what he wants. And on the one hand, it's like, well, it actually kind of is, but luckily, from a Christian point of view,
Urim and Thummim. Okay, just saying, Urim and Thummim.
Yeah.
Give them a magic 8-ball. Just shake this, and whatever it says, that's what the Picard wants. So, but I mean, that's kind of from a Christian point of view, and Jewish point of view. We have revelation for that. That's how we determine what God wants. Is we have his messages from us, and that's what Dr. Barron was trying to tell Picard: is help these people by giving them revelation so that they know what to do with this new worldview that they have. Picard's alternative is interesting. He beams down, and he's going to Liko is going to shoot him with an arrow to prove that the Picard is an immortal being, a supernatural being, and Picard's willing to let him do it, sacrifice his own life.
And this is where Liko is the most stupid. Yeah. Because he's standing right there saying, I am not a deity. If someone you think is a deity tells you they're not, trust them on that.
Right.
Yeah. So that's opposite to Ghostbusters then. If someone asks you or God, you say yes.
Yeah. Well, in this case, if he's telling you he's not a deity, then either he's really not a deity or he really doesn't want you to know that he's a deity. Either way, what you're about to do is not going to end well. So, but to Liko's credit, in one sense, or to understanding him, he's got this idea that he's convinced that Picard can bring back his dead wife, and that has sort of driven him a little mad in that sense. So there's a little bit of understanding in that.
And it's not unreasonable for him to think that, because they're ambiguous about did he really die or not. But he believes he died, and the injuries he sustained were gone when he woke up. So so he has reason to think he himself was brought back from the dead, and if Picard's doctor slave could do that for him, then Picard could bring back his wife. Sure, why not?
Right. So in the end, Picard, who apparently Crusher doesn't do a very good job of healing the wound with the regenerator, because he's got a sling at the end.
She left it to say, well, that was stupid, so I'm going to make you deal with this for a little while in punishment. No.
or so that the Mintakans don't think that he's that he's a god again, because he can heal that wound immediately. Maybe we just pretend to have we have a sling to pretend he's still injured. But we have this going away party where he they give Picard this gift of some sort of weaving
tapestry.
Yeah, it's tapestry. Yeah. That we'll actually see in his office, his ready room later on in the series. Yeah.
I forgot that this was the episode where it came from.
Yes, yeah. That they go off, and it's interesting. The Mintakans can have a hard time believing that. Why would you want to study us? You're so advanced. We're so primitive compared to you. And the answer is we were as you are, and so that helps us to know ourselves. Which is why anthropology exists. To know ourselves today, we study what we were in the past. So that's that sort of information. So, and that's where things wrap up. So last thoughts? Any final notes, Father Cory?
Nothing here.
Jimmy?
This episode had good elements. It had some bad elements. On balance, I'd put it above the 50% line in terms of quality.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I mean, if you just put a pin in Roddenberry's anti-religion humanist stuff.
There's the anti-religion, there's the shaky acting on the part of the Mintakans, there's the bad dialogue, but there's good plotting. And I like the plotting. I like that they've got some anti-religion lines in here. I like the way they otherwise handle the issue of religion.
Right. And as you said, it wouldn't take much to fix all that if only they had. Great. Excellent. So we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Santa S., Kathy S., Mark M., Father Nathan L., and Andrew B. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of Who Watches the Watchers. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can send an email to trek@sqpn.com or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Deep Space Nine episode, Indiscretion. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest, and remember, the Mintakans are beginning to believe in a god, and the one they've chosen is you.